I boarded the train just a few minutes before midnight, the last ride of the night. The platform was nearly empty, the flickering yellow lights above casting long, unsettling shadows. As I stepped inside, a strange chill ran through me. It wasn't the usual cold of a winter night. This felt different, like stepping into a place that didn't quite belong to this world. I found an empty seat by the window, the dim reflections of the station fading as the train jerked forward. The inside of the carriage felt oddly outdated. The seats were old-fashioned, the fabric slightly torn, the overhead luggage racks made of rusted metal. The scent of something musty and decayed lingered in the air. I glanced around, expecting to see at least a few other passengers, but the carriage was eerily empty. At first, I dismissed the unease as exhaustion. It had been a long day, and I just wanted to get home. But then, as the train moved through the dark countryside, I noticed something unsettling. The windows. They weren't reflecting me. I could see the rows of empty seats, the passing darkness outside, but my own image was missing. My pulse quickened. I turned my head slightly, waving my hand in front of the glass. Nothing, no reflection. The train rumbled forward, and that's when I heard it. A faint whisper just behind me. A chill crept up my spine. I spun around, but there was no one there. The seat behind me was empty. The entire carriage was empty. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "You're just tired," I muttered under my breath, but then I noticed something else. The ads and signs plastered above the windows. They weren't in any language I recognized. The letters were twisted, distorted, as if they had been written in some forgotten script. The longer I stared, the more they seemed to shift and rearrange themselves into something unreadable. A loud knock made me jump. It came from the seat across from me. No one was there, but the seat cushion sank slightly, as if someone invisible had just sat down. My throat went dry. I grabbed my phone, intending to check the time, maybe text someone. But my screen was black, not off, not dead, just black, like an empty void. I tapped at it frantically, but nothing changed. And then the whispers started again. This time, they were closer. I couldn't make out the words, but they felt wrong, like something ancient, something that shouldn't exist in this world. My fingers dug into the seat. "Is someone there?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Silence. Then the train lights flickered. For a split second I saw them, passengers. Dozens of them sitting in the seats, dressed in old, tattered clothes. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow. They were staring at me. The lights flickered again, and they were gone. I shot up from my seat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I needed to get off this train. I staggered toward the door at the end of the carriage, but the handle wouldn't budge, locked. Then, the train lurched violently. I stumbled, grabbing onto a pole for support. The windows outside had changed. There was no countryside anymore. No city lights, just endless darkness, as if the train was traveling through nothingness. A voice whispered in my ear. Cold breath brushed against my skin. "You don't belong here." My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned my head slowly, terrified of what I might see. A woman stood beside me. Her face was half decayed, one eye missing, her lips twisted into something between a smile and a snarl. "Get out," she whispered. The train shuddered, the lights going out completely. I was plunged into darkness, and then I woke up. I was still in the train, but everything was normal. The seats were clean, The windows reflected my face. There were other passengers around me, staring at their phones, lost in their own world. The train was pulling into my stop. Had I imagined everything? A dream? A hallucination? I stumbled off the train, my legs weak. As I turned back to look at the carriage, my blood ran cold. The passengers inside, they were the same ones I had seen in the flickering light. The hollow eyes, the tattered clothes, and they were all staring at me. The doors slid shut. The train pulled away, and I knew, deep in my gut, that I had just stepped out of something I was never meant to survive. I've been train conductor for nearly 15 years. I've seen everything. Drunks passed out in their seats, late-night commuters asleep with their heads against the window, even the occasional thief trying to sneak through carriages. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever unsettled me like what happened that night. It was a slow shift, the last train of the night nearly empty. The dim lights inside the train flickered occasionally, the way they always do when we pass through the tunnels. I was making my routine walk through the carriages, checking tickets, making sure no one was causing trouble. Then, as I stepped into the third carriage, I saw him. A man, sitting by the window, dressed in an old brown coat, staring outside at the passing darkness. His posture was stiff, unnatural. His hands rested on his lap, fingers slightly curled. He never blinked. I pulled out my notepad. "Ticket, please." He didn't respond. I cleared my throat and took a step closer. "Sir, I need to see your ticket." Still nothing. That's when I noticed something strange. His breath wasn't fogging up the glass. It was a cold night, and every other window had traces of condensation where passengers exhaled against them. But his? Nothing. A chill crept up my spine. I hesitated, then reached out to tap his shoulder. My fingers passed right through him. I yanked my hand back, stumbling a step away. My breath caught in my throat. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe I was just overtired, imagining things. Maybe the dim light was playing tricks on me. Then, in the reflection of the window, he moved. Not in the seat, not in front of me. Only in the reflection. His head turned slowly, impossibly slow, until he was looking directly at me. His eyes, empty sunken holes, deeper than any darkness I'd ever seen. I spun around, but he was still sitting there, motionless. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Who are you?" No response. The train rocked slightly, a faint screech of metal against metal as it sped through the night. The lights flickered, and for a split second, he was gone. I turned in every direction, scanning the carriage. Empty. I exhaled sharply. Maybe I was just exhausted. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. I started to back away, forcing myself to breathe. But then the train speakers crackled, a voice whispering, distorted, but unmistakable. He never left. The sound sent ice through my veins. I ran to the control panel near the carriage door and flipped through the security feed. My hands trembled as I watched the black and white footage. I rewound a few seconds, back to when I had entered the carriage. There was no one in the seat. I was standing there, talking to nothing, reaching out to touch nothing. My stomach twisted in a knot. Then the footage glitched, the screen flickered, static rippling across it. And when it cleared, he was there, sitting perfectly still, staring directly at the camera. I slammed the panel shut and turned on my heel, hurrying back toward the front of the train. I needed to tell the driver. I needed to get out of that carriage, but as I reached for the door to the next compartment, I felt it. Cold, a deep, unnatural cold, pressing against my back, and then fingers. I don't know how else to describe it. It was as if something unseen ran icy fingers down the back of my neck. I didn't turn around. I couldn't turn around. I stumbled forward, yanking open the door and practically throwing myself into the next carriage. The moment I stepped through, the cold vanished. The air was normal again. Passengers sat in their seats, oblivious, scrolling through their phones or sleeping against the windows. Everything looked real. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. I glanced back at the door I had just passed through. The glass was fogged over from the temperature difference. And there, in the condensation, a single handprint. A handprint from the other side. I didn't finish my shift that night. I made an excuse, told my supervisor I felt sick, and got off at the next stop. I never worked the last train again. But sometimes, late at night, when I take the train home as a passenger, I still feel it, that unnatural cold creeping up my spine. And sometimes, in the reflection of the window, I see him, sitting there, waiting. The train wasn't supposed to stop. It was a late-night express running non-stop between two major cities. I had taken this route dozens of times before, and I knew the schedule by heart. There were no small-town stops, no forgotten stations along the way. Yet, as I sat there, watching the dark countryside blur past the window, I felt the train slowing down. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe we were going through a slight turn. Maybe the tracks were uneven. But then the wheels screeched, the brakes hissed, and the train came to a full stop. A hush fell over the carriage. A few passengers stirred in their seats, glancing around in confusion. A man across from me, wearing headphones, pulled them off and frowned. "We stopping for something?" I had no answer. I turned to the window, expecting to see a station, or at least some sign of civilization. But there was nothing, just darkness, endless swallowing darkness stretching out on either side of the train. No street lights, no buildings, no roads, only a dense, suffocating blackness. The intercom crackled to life. A garbled voice muttered something unintelligible. Static swallowed the rest. A woman a few seats away stood up and peeked into the aisle, as if looking for a train attendant. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice uneasy. Nobody answered. Then the lights flickered once, twice. And in that brief moment of darkness, I saw them. Silhouettes, dozens of them standing just outside the train, barely visible against the night. Their forms were shadowy, featureless, pressed up against the windows. The lights came back on. The windows were empty again. My stomach clenched. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew what I had seen. I wasn't the only one. The woman in the aisle turned pale. She took a step back. Did anyone else see that?" she whispered. The man with the headphones muttered, "No way. No way." He was gripping the seat in front of him, his knuckles white. The train didn't move. The silence stretched thick and unnatural. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, and checked the time. 2:37 a.m. I tried to check my location, but my phone showed nothing. No service, no GPS signal. Just a blank screen, as if we had slipped into a place that didn't exist on any map. Then, the train doors hissed open. My body locked in place. No one had pressed the emergency button. No announcement had been made. The doors had opened on their own. A heavy, suffocating air rushed in, carrying a scent of something rotten, something decayed. It was faint, but it was there. The kind of smell that lingers in abandoned places, in forgotten graveyards. No one moved. We all sat frozen, staring at the open doors, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then one of the passengers, a middle-aged man, sitting near the front, stood up. Without a word, without hesitation, he stepped toward the exit. "Wait," the woman in the aisle called out. "Where are you going?" The man didn't respond. He walked steadily, his movements eerily smooth, almost unnatural. He stepped off the train and disappeared into the darkness. Not walked away, not faded into the distance. He simply vanished the moment his foot touched the ground outside. The woman gasped, stumbling backward. "Oh my God!" A younger guy near the back cursed under his breath. This is messed up, man." The train doors remained open. The cold air pressed in, swirling through the carriage, thick with something unseen. Then another passenger stood up. A young woman this time. Just like the man before, she didn't speak, didn't hesitate. She simply walked forward, expression blank, eyes distant, stepped off the train, and vanished. I gripped the edge of my seat, my heart hammering. What the hell is happening? One by one, passengers started rising. Some of them muttered under their breath, words I couldn't understand. Others walked in eerie silence. Each of them moved in the same way, calm, detached, like they weren't in control of their own bodies. And they all stepped into the darkness. Gone. I turned to the man with the headphones. He was still there, gripping his seat tightly, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. "They're not real," he whispered. "They can't be real." The lights flickered again. More silhouettes outside. Closer now, watching, waiting. I forced myself to move, to act. I shot up from my seat and grabbed the nearest emergency button, slamming my palm against it. Nothing happened. The train wasn't responding. I turned back toward the doors, just in time to see the woman in the aisle being pulled toward them. She struggled, her hands clawing at the air, but her feet moved against her will. It was as if invisible hands were dragging her forward. I lunged, grabbing her arm. She turned her head toward me, eyes wild with terror. "Please don't let me go." I pulled with all my strength. Something pulled back. For a moment, it felt like I was caught in a tug-of-war with something I couldn't see. Then, whatever force had hold of her let go. She collapsed against me, shaking violently, sobbing. The train doors slammed shut. The train jerked forward. The intercom crackled again. "We apologize for the unscheduled stop. Please remain seated." The voice was distorted, mechanical. Wrong. I turned to the woman. Her face was pale, her breath coming in gasps. "What was that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I looked around. The carriage was half empty. The people who had stepped off were gone. No trace of them. No sign they had ever been there. Their seats were undisturbed. Their belongings, phones, bags, jackets, remained, like they had simply ceased to exist. The train continued moving, the outside world normal again, but none of us spoke. None of us moved. And deep down, I knew, wherever that stop had been, whatever had been waiting outside, it wasn't finished with us yet. The train was moving again, but the silence inside was unbearable. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls of the carriage were closing in. The woman I had saved was still gripping my arm, her whole body trembling. Her breathing was shallow, erratic, like she had just been pulled from the edge of death. I looked around. So many seats were empty now. The people who had stepped off into the darkness. They were just gone. Their belongings were still there, untouched, as if they had never existed in the first place. The man with the headphones sat stiffly in his seat, his face pale. He hadn't moved since the train started moving again. His fingers clutching the seat so tightly, his knuckles had turned white. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my own breathing. My mind screamed for a rational explanation, but there wasn't one. And then I noticed something was wrong with the reflections. The windows showed nothing but pitch black night outside, but inside, the dim yellow train lights cast faint reflections of us all. Or at least they were supposed to. I turned my head slowly, scanning the window's reflection. The woman next to me, she was there. The man with the headphones, he was there. But then my eyes moved further down the carriage. There were shapes she in the reflection. Dark, featureless figures sitting in the empty seats where the vanished passengers had been. I snapped my head around, looking at the actual seats. Empty. I looked back at the window. The figures were still there, and they were pushing, watching us. A shudder ran through me. My hands felt ice cold. The woman must have seen my face because she turned to look at the window too. The moment her eyes landed on the reflection, she gasped and clamped a hand over her mouth. The man with the headphones let out a shaky breath. His voice cracked. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Neither did I. The figures in the reflection didn't move, but I felt their presence pressing against me. My instinct screamed at me to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen them. But then one of the shadowy figures lifted a hand and waved. A slow, deliberate motion. A chill shot through my spine. Then the lights flickered again. In the split second of darkness, a cold, damp breath brushed against my ear. Almost time. The whisper was so close, so real, that I jumped out of my seat. The woman let out a sharp cry, grabbing my arm again. When the lights came back on, my heart nearly stopped. The canny figures were gone from the reflection. But the seats were no longer empty. People were sitting in them, or at least, things that looked like people. Their faces were pale, unnaturally still, eyes too dark, mouths stretched into slight, unnatural smiles. They were dressed like the passengers who had disappeared. Their clothes, their hairstyles, it was all the same. But something was just wrong. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The woman beside me squeezed my hand. Those aren't the same people, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They look like them, but they're not. The man with the headphones let out a choked sound, gripping his seat tighter. This isn't real. This isn't real. I wanted to believe that, I really did. But then, one of the passengers turned their head toward me. Their neck moved in a slow, unnatural way, as if the bones beneath the skin weren't quite right. Their lips pulled back in a grotesque grin. And then, in a voice that didn't belong to them, almost time. The same whisper I had heard before. The train suddenly lurched forward. Hard, like it had hit something, or like the tracks had shifted beneath us. The woman screamed, grabbing onto the seat in front of her. The lights flickered again, this time for longer. In that suffocating darkness, something brushed against my shoulder. Cold fingers. The light snapped back on. I turned sharply, the seat behind me, empty. I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. My body was trembling, my heartbeat erratic. Then the intercom crackled again. A voice, mechanical, distorted, spoke. Final stop approaching. Final stop. That wasn't possible. We were nowhere near our destination. I pulled out my phone again. Still no service, no GPS, just a mumpy blank screen. The train began slowing down. Outside, the darkness remained. But now, in the distance, a faint glow appeared, dim lights, like lanterns, flickering in the void. I didn't want to see what was waiting for us outside. I didn't want to know. The woman beside me gripped my arm tighter. I don't think we should get off. I nodded. We're staying on. The man with the headphones barely breathed the words. Yeah, we stay on. The train kept slowing. The eerie figures in the seats watched us, their smiles never fading. I braced myself, not knowing what would happen next. And then, the train came to a stop.